You're listening to the Longer Haul Youth Ministry Podcast with Jody Livingston and Chris Trent, episode number 52. We're still doing it.
52, I'm in again.
Welcome to the Longer Haul Youth Ministry Podcast, helping you survive and thrive in youth ministry. And now, your hosts, Jody Livingston and Chris Trent.
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to the show today. Thanks for tuning in and listening and making this episode today a part of your day. If it's your first time checking out the podcast and listening, thanks for tuning in and listening. Welcome. It's good to have you. And if it's not your first time, well, welcome on back.
They're back.
They came back.
I love that.
You didn't scare them away.
I know. Hey, what are you going to do?
That's good. You can find us on the Twitter sphere at Jody Livingston and
Chris Trent.
Big Ask. We're not very creative.
Well, I'm an early adopter. What can I say?
Yeah, me too. And on the Facebook at The Longer Haul. All of the links and resources that we mentioned in this episode, you can find on the show notes page at thelongerhaul.com/episode 052. So they should go check that out.
No doubt.
So we're back. We have a guest today.
An awesome guest.
We promised a guest. And
like one of my faves. Like, I'm not even kidding. One of my favorite people in this whole world. No doubt about it.
That's true.
Mainly because of the laugh.
Yeah. Well, we said, okay. I said, Chris, who do you want for your first guest? And there wasn't even a conversation about it.
No doubt about it. And so that guy wasn't available.
Right.
And so, just kidding.
I'm trying to wait to the intro.
You're trying to wait to the intro?
I really am. I'm like laughing.
Hey, you guys, check it out.
I've tried hard enough.
My friend and Jody's new friend, Maina Mwaura, is here with us today. No doubt about it. So, Maina, what's going on, man? You good?
It's good to be with you guys. This is your first, I'm your first guest.
First official guest.
Second episode? Is this correct?
So this will be our third episode together.
Wow.
Of course, Jody's been doing this for a long time, so he already had knocked out like 48, 49 episodes.
Wow.
And so, yeah, man, we're kicking it together.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
So you're the first of the new.
Yeah.
I feel kind of dumb because you guys, I live like 5 minutes from here, so I've always seen your name on stuff. And I've always wondered, I wonder where that's done at here in Atlanta. Yeah. And it's 5 minutes from my house, which is just
we're right here the whole time.
Super weird.
Yeah. Less impressive. That's what that means. It's rather underwhelming.
No, it's still impressive. It's actually more impressive because it's 5 minutes from my house.
Yeah. Close for you, for sure. Yeah, we actually all got together and hung out. We're hanging out today in the room together, which is great.
Yeah, and that's new because that doesn't always happen.
Yeah.
Normally this isn't. And yeah, so the cool thing that no one knows is like we're hiding out in the back of like our student center, crammed in the back of a Sunday school room.
Beautiful.
And hoping that no one, like a custodian or somebody, doesn't decide today is the day they're actually going to clean
the coffee that I spilled earlier.
But that would be if
that
somebody
could never
decided,
happen in youth ministry though, could it? Could they knock on the door and clean? Yeah,
dude. If that's what I told him, like it'll blend in with the rest of the stains, and if somebody decides to clean today, it'll be a first.
Yeah. If you're listening, I really did spill an entire, a massive, like, what are these cups called? These
tumbler thing.
Tervis tumbler.
Yeah.
Like one of the big ones. It was full of coffee. And I spilt the entire thing on Jody's carpet and felt terrible.
You can't even tell.
Which you can't even tell now. Just blended right
What's
in.
a youth ministry event without?
Well, hey, let's talk about Maina. We don't want to waste too much time because, hey, we got a special guest, and this guy is awesome. So Maina, we want to talk a little bit, give a little bit about where you're from, but we invited you today to talk about diversity in youth ministry, a.k.a.
I'm waiting for the title. I've already heard the title. Obviously,
questions two white guys have always wanted to ask, but are not sure if we can even ask or not. So, but you and I are close enough friends that I feel like we can have a good conversation here. Definitely. Let's talk a little bit. Let's tell listeners, though, who are you? Kind of give a little bit of history because you have youth ministry in your blood. There's no doubt about that. So give a little background on where you came from and what you're doing these days.
Man, born and raised in the hills of Orlando, Florida.
Oh, I love it.
That's kind of where it all started.
I love Orlando, Florida.
Someone loves Orlando more than others in this room. I won't say who. Chris Trent. Born and raised in Orlando. of course, came to know Christ. I hope that's okay to talk about that here.
Yeah.
Came to know Christ as a middle schooler. Man.
Oh, yes.
And it was, the light switch came on. It really did spiritually. And then, grew up in Orlando, obviously, went to school at Liberty University, and then went to seminary at New Orleans Theological Seminary, and been a youth ministry now for 23 years. I think I'm still in youth ministry, so I still do count it still in that overall deal. Yes, just because I love youth ministry.
Yeah.
Man, I think it's just, I think once it's in your blood, it stays in your blood.
No doubt about it.
The whole time.
For sure.
I really do believe that. And of course, I think the title that we're talking about today is, of course, important to youth ministry because this is the most diverse group in the country. And on a regular basis, I get to ask people questions. So it's kind of weird sitting on this side.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is the crazy part. So Maina, one of the cool things that Maina's been doing in the recent year, I mean, you basically you do interviews and you write articles. You've had stuff in Christianity Today, and you've had some pretty awesome interviews recently, and one of them even involved you going to the White House, as in the White House that's in Washington, D.C., if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, no doubt about it. But it's weird sitting on this side, though. It's kind of one of those deals where usually, when you ask people questions like you guys are, they're on the hot seat.
Yeah.
But it's kind of bizarre being here, but
the tables have turned.
I'm going to get used to it, I think, hopefully, here in the next few minutes, because this is kind of weird. Like, okay, what are the questions going to be? This should be good.
Sure.
I'm glad to be here with you guys, though, talking about this topic. And once again, I just really believe in this generation as being the most diverse generation in our country. And, of course, I would even say the world to a large extent. It's an important topic to talk about. So thanks for making it one of your first guests to talk about that. Though.
Yeah. So I think, Jody, and you can jump and help me out, as far as setting this thing up. But to me, like when I thought about this topic, the fact that diversity is coming.
Yeah.
Like, this is one of the most diverse generations, but me being involved in youth ministry for over 20 years, I've seen so much of that change. Not as if 20 years ago there was no diversity at all. I'm not saying that, but just continuing to try to learn what that looks like, how to be an advocate for that, how to be a part of that is a real challenge for me, a white guy growing up in Crestview, Florida, and serving at predominantly white churches, all of this time. So I'm just really curious to kind of, and some of the questions that we want to talk about here are really just to kind of say, hey, help all of us that are listening to know what we can do to be an encouragement in that. Because I think, there's no doubt we believe that and we want to be an encouragement that. We want to be an advocate for that. Yeah. But how do we do a better job? So,
yeah, I think too, I think it's important, and we were even talking about this before we started recording, to recognize that, in our particular situations, we are predominantly in a white church, but others may not be, right? Yeah. And so when we talk about race in general, I think hopefully there's some principles that we'll flesh out today that kind of apply either way, whether you're talking majority or minority or and the community that you're in. And so what I don't want you to hear as a listener is, oh, this is a white and black thing, although it probably will predominantly be that because that's what we are in this room. But beyond that, I think you're right, Chris, in the sense that, the diversity thing is coming and it's here. Our students are dealing with it in most cases much more probably than we are even, and we've got to figure out how to not just deal with it or manage it, which I feel like is what the church has predominantly done, or at least attempted to do. But how do we embrace that, encourage that in a way that honors the Lord and exalts Christ and steers people towards the gospel, and breaks down walls that we put up, regardless of what they are. So.
And you gotta help us, Maina, because we're just gonna ask some questions, and honestly, you just got to call me out on these questions if they're even dumb questions. I mean,
once again, it's just really bizarre sitting on this side.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's what people think of when I'm asking them questions.
All right, so let's start right here, though, because honestly, I look, and people listening are probably going to be like, "Who is this guy? What's he asking this question for?" But what? This is just elementary stuff here. But when is it good to say, like, if I'm a youth pastor, and say I'm a white youth pastor,
Yeah.
And I've got kids coming in my group that are not white. When is it good to say black versus African American? Does it matter?
That's a good question.
I mean, I don't know why, but honestly, I mean, that's just one of those basic questions.
Yeah.
I think some white people probably go like, wait, can I say black or can I say African American, or do I say what's like the politically but not even so much that I just want to be politically correct as much as I just want to be affirming, or should it be anything at all?
Yes, it's interesting. I think a lot of Black people struggle with what to say also at times, so it's not just for you guys. Typically, culture today would say African American when you're speaking in front of groups, obviously. But one-on-one, I think Black is okay. I mean, I've never heard any of my Black friends go, man, I'm just really mad that they just said Black or they just said African American. I think it's the heart, the intention behind it. I don't think most people care, to be fair. But of course, when we're in an audience, we tend to use that one. But most of my Black friends like the word Black, though.
Yeah.
So it's kind of one of those, it all depends on just where you're at.
Sure. Is it inappropriate sometimes to even acknowledge that? Because I think I catch myself, and this is just being honest.
Yeah.
I catch myself when I'm trying to maybe identify a kid. If the kid happens to be Black, though,
Yeah.
I say, the Black kid.
Yeah. I think that's okay. I mean, because we have to describe people, so it's kind of one of those things. It all depends on how you're doing it, obviously.
Sure.
But if I'm trying to explain someone to someone, I can't just say, man, that man over there.
Yeah, right.
Because they're going to go, that's weird, okay? What does he look like? And so one of the things I think that we wrestle with in the body of Christ is, and probably in America in general, is saying, hey, here's what someone looks like. And it's okay to say, hey, man, that is a Hispanic guy over there or African-American Black guy over there. It's okay to point out distinctions. And I think God is okay with that. I believe God is okay with that. So we have to be okay with that too.
Is that an airplane I hear flying over us?
It is
amazing.
Which is
just call it out, man.
out here. That's
So in one of the earlier podcasts when Jody and I have just started, he stresses out over like quality of sound, so that's freaking him out right now. I don't care.
Yeah, it is.
Like I feel like the listeners will be forgiving, but he's freaking out.
Yeah, I think they'll be forgiving.
Wait till the train comes through.
Yeah.
That's coming next.
Now that is always.
Now the train, that might be a different story. Choo-choo. So,
Well, I think, so I grew up in East Tennessee, and it's East Tennessee.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to throw more stereotypes there than there are, because it's a beautiful place with beautiful people, and we do wear shoes. So we did have a lot of coon hunters that would go off but never catch coons, but had
Jody's putting quote
really
signs in the
good
air. What is
lemonade.
that?
So that was there. They were always out hunting raccoons, but never coming back with any. They weren't very good. But I just don't drink the pink lemonade in the fridge. That was the rule. But my stepbrother and stepsister are Black, and they weren't with us always, but they would come live with us in the summer. Or actually, my sister moved in with us for a while and lived with us through college. So to a degree, and I'm not going to say completely, but I kind of experienced some pretty racial prejudices on both sides of that, and not bad. So I don't want to paint this as like some dramatic thing, but I feel like for me, growing up, honestly, that was just my brother and sister. Like there was no like a thing, and I loved going and hanging out with their family. It was crazy different, right? But I loved that. Or the few times where we'd go to their family's church, on their sides, like, and so I feel like that certainly has played a part into my personal life, how I view things, and maybe I don't often see things that I should see or that others see. Not that I'm blind to everything or colorblind to anything, but I'm just not as uncomfortable maybe in some of those settings than some are. So I don't want to speak as if I'm an expert, because I'm not, or that I'm anything more than I am here. But I have seen some of that in my life. So all that to say, I'd be curious for you to share for listeners, like, what are some like preconceived ideas that you feel like coming from the other side? Okay, so like, and because I'm sure we'll get to, white towards whatever, but like, are there certain preconceived ideas or notions or stereotypes even that maybe are cast towards us being white that would affect how we're seen and how we should interact?
Yeah.
Does that make sense? I said a whole lot to probably ask a very little, but I want to because I want to make sure you understand where I'm coming from on that question.
It does. I would love to hear your story more, Jody. That had to be interesting, by the way, being a household where both those dynamics are going on. I would say, I think one of the preconceived notions may be, man, they don't maybe get us, which I would say I think we're doing better racially than we have in a long time. I know that a lot of things are rising to the top today, obviously, but that's always a good thing, though, because it brings out truth, it brings out conversation, brings out great discussion like we're having here today. 10 years ago, maybe even fewer than that, we probably would not sit around the table talking about this. So I think we're at a great point, especially in youth ministry culture, to be talking about it. I think one of the preconceived notions, they don't get us. I think number two may be, man, all white people are rich. It's one of those kind of things. I remember being a youth pastor at a predominantly black church, and we took them on a mission trip one time to South Carolina. And so a lot of the kids grew up in a very middle to upper middle class black area of town here in Atlanta. And for a lot of them, they had never seen white people who were poor.
Yeah.
I mean, so it was one of those things for them that they thought, wow, that was a cultural shock. Another shock to a lot of them was seeing white people, because they didn't see them in their normal everyday setting. And so for their preconceived notion, it was, whoa, okay, white people can be poor. Because on TV, the stereotype tends to be affluent, rich, and all those things. So that's, I think, one also. And I really do think, Jody, if we would sit down and talk to the people who are 3 feet in front of us, we get a better understanding.
Yeah.
But far too often, another preconceived notion is, I think people think, man, we just can't talk about it.
Right.
And so when we do that, the wall goes up. And of course, whenever the wall goes up, stereotypes go up too. And so another preconceived notion is we stereotype. I think on both sides of the field on this one. And one of the best ways to bring down stereotypes, what we're doing today, having a conversation.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
If I'm in a youth group, that's predominantly white, say.
Yeah.
And if I have a black teenager that visits my youth group, is there something that I should be doing extra to make that teenager feel welcome? Or is even that, and even thinking that I need to do something extra there, what would you, if you have listeners, I'm sure we have listeners that are predominantly white, no doubt about it. And then, maybe they get a guest like that. What are anything we should be mindful of that you would recommend there?
Yes, great question. I think we have to be mindful in any culture, in any setting, whether it's an all-black youth group and a white teenager walks in or the other way around. We have to say, man, being the minority can be tough. I mean, it can be tiring. You have to work at being the minority in some circles, just because anytime anything different is introduced to us, or we are the difference in the room, I mean, it's one of those, it's tough. I mean, you have to walk through that and have to understand, okay, what is the majority thinking, or are they not thinking? I would say when a student walks into a predominantly white youth group, I think the leader has to understand that they may be bringing some racial baggage. I hate to use the word baggage behind that, but they may be bringing some racial baggage, stereotypes. There'll be all kind of things that come with that. Their parents I think is the greater issue, in the sense of the parent tends to come from maybe a certain area of town or a certain part of the country where this may be new to them all together. But I really do go back to the heart, the heart, the heart. I think people can walk through and deal with intention, even if it comes across, weird.
Yeah.
Because people understand
Sure.
that in this area and dealing with race in our culture right now, they do understand that everyone's walking through landmines all together, trying to avoid stepping on the wrong one.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's tough. I mean, we are in that setting. It's a great season, though. I do think talk about this issue more than any other season, just because we can talk about it.
Yeah. Yeah. So if that is there a chance that I could overdo it?
Yes. And I've seen people overdo it before on both sides, and it's just awkward and weird. I mean, honestly, I'll get in the car with my wife, and we'll start laughing about it when someone does it. Now, they're good. They're great friends of mine. I've never seen you do it, Trent, obviously, but I will go, dude, you're really overdoing it, man.
Yeah.
You don't have to overdo it all that much.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that we tend to, and I'm thankful we don't say this like we used to say, I don't see color. I mean, that's just, honestly, that's not true. We do see color, and it's okay to see color. I mean, Jesus talks about we do see culture in Scripture. It's okay to talk about that. But we say we don't see color, what we're really saying is, man, we don't see that person.
Sure.
And they do everyone comes with a skin tone. So it's okay to see color. What's not okay is to see discrimination or racism, or have tendencies toward one or the other. That's what's not okay. But seeing color, that's part of who we are, though.
Yeah, and that seems to, I mean, like you're as you're saying that, I'm thinking immediately like of James, right? And James instructing not to show privilege or oppress. And that goes beyond color, race. I mean,
I literally was sitting there thinking, wait, who? Oh, you mean James in the Bible? My bad. I got you now. I'm with you. Sorry, Jody. I'm trying to catch up.
Gosh, maybe this whole thing was
like you
not
mean
a
in the
good
Bible?
idea.
Okay, I got you now. That James.
Yeah.
Okay,
The
gotcha.
next guest, let's do theology.
Yeah.
We should work on that.
Middle school pastor right there. But I think, when James instructs like not to show privilege or oppression or I think sometimes we think about that in terms of playing favorites in youth ministry, right? Because that's where you're playing favorites. How many times do you hear playing favorites? Oh, they're your favorite. But I think the larger application for that, particularly in our culture today, would extend to race.
Yeah.
And I think, but too often maybe and I'll say this, like, I think for me, and I think for a lot of folks who would be white, there is such a fear of offending, or being misunderstood, or being taken or seen as a racist. Like that's a word that it's thrown around a lot today. Sometimes deserved, and sometimes not. But I mean, man, if you want to really offend me or hurt me, that's a real quick way to do it.
Yeah.
Right. Because I can, and we do this with everything, right? We're talking about race today, but we do it with everything. I mean, I can disagree with you and not be doing so because of, I'm a racist, or because I'm whatever political thing, or because I'm a Christian, or because I'm, whatever. But we're so quick in our culture to label.
We are. And I think a lot of that is social media brings on a lot of this. And so it's one of those kind of things where, if we see it on Facebook or Twitter, then it's got to be true.
Right.
And the problem with that is, man, there have been times that's not been the case. I remember recently, I was at your church, in fact. I keep wanting to call you Trent, and that's how we talk, outside of this. I keep
that works.
Sorry,
that
Chris,
works.
for our time. And it was I stereotyped because it was a class on unity and race.
Sure.
So I automatically thought, man, this is coming from East Cobb here in Atlanta. Do they really understand race? Was going through my mind, and I got into class. It was one of the best Bible study classes I've ever gone to, and so I put it on Facebook, and immediately someone messaged me and said, So the other Bible studies you've gone to have not been good. And I'm thinking, wait a minute. No, it's not what I'm saying here. But I think we oftentimes stereotype, Jody. And we have to say to ourselves, before we read anything or say anything, or before somebody says, hey, this person's a racist or whatever, man, do some homework. Yeah. Do a little bit of homework. I don't mean, you go home and do an hour's worth, but 5 minutes worth can pretty much tell you where this is true or it's not true. And I don't think we have a concrete definition in our country and our culture on what racism is and what it's not. So oftentimes we're saying racist, and we probably mean something else like prejudice or stereotyping. And those words are different from racist.
Sure.
Very different.
That was going to be my next question is how would you define that?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I know it's if it was easy, we would have defined it. Right. But like, what would you say? Where's that line?
Yeah, I think the line comes down to intentions once again. So there's intentional racism. I think we all have seen that. We know that. That's very easy to spot. And then there's unintentional. I mean, I think we all bring in bias to certain areas, certain groups, certain stores maybe that we don't even know are just kind of rising to the top. I'll never forget, once again, going back to your church, Chris, I was in a class, in your Bible study class, and one of the ladies I was sitting next to, we played a game about white privilege, and literally she said, I never knew I brought that baggage with me when it came to describing black people. And for her, it was a wake-up call of, whoa, I didn't even realize that or know that, basically. So with racism, we have to go intentional. It's easy to point that one out. Unintentional, that goes to the heart. So I think we all have to do a gut check to go, man, where am I with that? Do I have friends who are like the people I am stereotyping? And when we do that, I think we have a clear understanding on this is what is racism and this is what is not racism. Some of it, once again, is stereotyping. It is prejudices, but it doesn't mean it's racism, though. And I think, and I'm glad that we're having this discussion, not just here, but overall, and even discussing, man, what is privilege and what is not privilege.
So let's dive deep there for just a second, because white privilege is really a thing.
Yeah, it is.
Right?
It is. And it's...
But help me to understand it as a thing. Because I don't think we, or me, or I don't think, and I think people like me sometimes, necessarily always appreciate or understand that is real. And if we do have white privilege, what we should even do, how we should deal with that, what we should do with that.
Yeah.
And that just even how we relate to that impacts the way we do youth ministry, of course. So define white privilege. What is that?
Well, I think anytime we have a privilege, it has to be given away, which is different for the American mindset, because we tend to think, man, this is ours. So, I got my house, my stuff. And so honestly, we're a giving culture, but at the same time, we really struggle with overall in this country, man, this is mine.
Yes.
Issue. And so when you talk about privilege, we automatically think, man, no, I'm not. And we automatically go to another box called shame with that. And so anytime shame is a part of anything, people want to go hide, which honestly, I think one of the things that we've got to get over in this country is we do have a history of racism in America. Far too often, we try to hide that to a certain degree instead of saying, man, this is what it is. And with any history comes the good and the bad. Unfortunately, part of our bad is racism. But at the same time, there's no other country. You can go and search on this one, Google it. In fact, there's no other country that has taken a turn, though, like America has when it comes to race and culture. Are we still far behind? Definitely. But at the same time, you look at all across the world, man, America does better than most countries, though, when it comes to this one. But to answer your question, though, I think we have to look at privilege and go, man, have I been given certain things far above other people? The answer is yes. And so, for example, I have cousins who live in Kenya, literally, in fact. And so I look at, me here in America and where they're at in Kenya. It's a great country, obviously. There are just certain privileges that I have that they don't have. And so even though we're the same skin tone, we come from the same family line, but there are just some privileges that I just have that they don't have. And I think that's where we have to go Bible on this one and go, man, God has called us to give away some of those privileges. And so here in America, you look at how far we've come. Really, we just started integrating schools really in the 70s when you look at when it was totally done. And that's only been 40 some years. Yeah. That's about it. And so you look at just the history when it comes to years, it's just been about 40 to 45 years, and look at how long we were not doing that, 100 plus years. Man, that could be a privilege to a certain degree just on education alone. So we have to look at privilege also, and I think this is tough for a lot of us to do this because we love to compare. We love to go, well, if I did it, then they should be doing it too. Not necessarily fair on that one, because if someone had 160 years of education freedom to a certain degree, and another group only had 40 some years to it, there's going to be some lagging, not with that person, but with their background, though, with their ancestors. It doesn't mean that we get to use that as a crutch, but it does mean it's a reality, though. And we have to look at it and talk about it and go, okay, man, because some people come from certain areas, they're going to bring some of that with them.
One of the things I've learned being your friend, Maina, and we had an opportunity to sit down at my church with some other black pastors. Yeah. And I got invited to that meeting accidentally, I think. It
was fun,
but it was a great. But one of the things, though, in that I learned, and I want to ask you this question so that our listeners can hear this as well. But would you say that it's true? And I think obviously I know the answer asking it, but would you say it's true that a high percentage of black people experience some type of prejudice or racism on a semi-regular basis or a regular basis or whatever? I mean, and even when I think about teenagers in my group, that most likely, like when I think of my white kids, I don't think of any of them experiencing any type of necessarily prejudice or racism. But is it fair to say that probably, though, if I have a black kid, that kid has experienced some type of, whether it be subtle or whether it be heavy, some type of racism? Is that fair?
I'd say 100%. I don't know of any one of my friends who've not experienced it. So I'm not saying, I don't want to say all. That's kind of.
Jody, I just think that there are I just think that some white people don't get that. Do you? I mean, I'm not saying that, and I'm not saying, oh, you're terrible for not getting that, but I just think that for me in that room that day, and we talked specifically that day, the example was the getting pulled over
by police officers.
By the police officers, and then there was a question even asked about, is there anybody in the room that's not been pulled over and put through? And none of the white pastors in the room had experienced what we talked about. All of the black people in the room had experienced that.
Yeah, and I think a buddy of mine told me recently, he goes, I just expect it. And so it's one of those things where I thought, that's interesting. But it is there. It is very much evident. I remember being on a staff at a certain church, and the guy was a good guy to a certain degree, but he'd call me in, he'd always go, and I was the only African American on their staff of 60 something, and he'd always go, now, I'm not on a witch hunt. And automatically you thought, this is kind of funny, because part of you is going, who is getting hunted here? Right. And you're the only one in the office. So you're like, and he meant it, I think, in a good way. I don't know his heart.
Turned me into a newt.
Right. It's kind of like, this is kind of weird. Yeah, this is kind of weird. Like, can I leave the room? Or is there very terminology that you could use? And he meant it, I guess, well. I don't know how he meant it, but it was one of those things where, after a while, I remember talking to another staff member, and they said, man, that's kind of offensive. I just expected it. So it wasn't I looked at the guy's heart first of all, and I know that he's a loving Christ follower. So I don't believe in any way that it was intentional. But it was one of those things where we have to look at stuff and go, man, we all bring cultural baggage with us. You mentioned East Tennessee. I'm always joking with my wife who went to school in East Tennessee. Man, those East Tennessee people. So we're always like laughing about it, but it's just known for certain things. Now, what would be wrong about that is if I were to go, man, I'm not going to talk to any East Tennessee people, or I'm not going to hang around East Tennessee people. That's where it goes to the next level. Are some of those stereotypes about East Tennessee true? Sure. Probably, I guess. But it's one of those things we have to look at race, and we have to always go back to the intention and the heart.
But I think it's fair, though, to say here that with the teenagers that we're working with in our youth group, though, that it's fair to try to keep in mind that some of those kids, those African-American kids, and maybe even other races like we talked about earlier, that they're maybe dealing with some stuff at times that the average kid's not dealing with.
Well, let me say this, because let me because as I'm listening, I'm just trying to listen and process. But let me say this to the listener, okay? So if you're listening, and there is a part of you when we start saying white privilege, when we start talking, that kind of you feel within you kind of welling up, almost like to get defensive or feeling offended. Man, let me just caution you to take a breath, to kind of slow roll that a little, and listen with a learning heart. Okay, because I think sometimes when we were talking about the importance of conversation, what happens so often is, and this is obviously the conversation in this moment, we start hearing things like that, and we start feeling like whether it's intended or not, kind of accusatory, or like, oh man, I don't know, but this isn't, and we just kind of wall off, or we stop listening, or the conversation ends. And I just feel like somewhere somebody's listening who is not in a context where they're having to deal maybe even with a lot of racial issues, and they start hearing that conversation, and maybe something within them just starts to kind of feel a little defensive.
Yeah, I think anytime you bring the word race up, automatically certain things go up, just because in our culture right now, you bring up that word and people, all of a sudden the wall just automatically just goes up. What we have to do is, like you just said, Jody, is step back. And I'm asking everyone, man, in your influence, people who and have that conversation. And I think once you have the conversation with someone who's different from you, the wall goes down. I think you learn a lot more. I think you understand someone's heart, especially if they're a believer. We should automatically go, man, the God that is within me is the same God that is within them. And so just as he convicts me, he may be convicting them. So how can I help my brother and sister in Christ come along on this one? And so we have to, I think, have a posture of, man, we want to learn. We want to have a conversation and talk about it, and not a posture of, man, the wall just goes up. And I think what we all tend to do is we look at social media to a large degree, and that's where we cannot derive our information from. You never win a war about anything on social media in 60 words or less anyway.
I was in a breakout last month at Southeastern Seminary. They did a Go conference for college and high school. We took a group of our college students up, and I was in a breakout with Walter Strickland there, who
great guy,
is amazing, right? Does their Kingdom Diversity Initiative stuff, and it was on racial reconciliation. And he made a couple of points that were, I thought, so good. One was just the fact that, hey, look, deeply seated bias takes a long time to become deeply seated. Yeah. And to think that it's going to suddenly go away quickly is naive, right?
Very much so.
And often we all live, regardless of our background, culture, relations. We are all living with some sense of bias that has been deeply embedded within us, and we may not even recognize that.
Yeah.
So the importance of learning, listening, patience with others, maybe who aren't quite yet where we would want them to be, is really important. And the other thing he made reference to was in Revelation. Chris, that's in the Bible.
That's really funny, dude.
John, he wrote Revelation.
Yeah, okay. Did he?
Yeah,
Did he?
That's what they say.
I'm pretty sure he did.
I didn't know him. But he when Revelation portrays this picture of us worshiping before the Lord there, we're all, because sometimes I think maybe we have this naive assumption that we're all going to be the same in heaven.
Yeah.
But this is in heaven.
Yeah.
And that is where we see all tribes, tongues, and nations present, right?
Yeah.
It's not like we get to heaven and we're all white, or we're all black, or we're all Hispanic, or we're all suddenly Hebrew.
Yeah.
The diversity exists beyond. I mean, the diversity that we experience, this isn't brought about by sin. This is the beauty of what God has created.
Very much so.
And it, to me, just drives home even more the importance of the local church.
Yeah.
And how many Christians do we know and see and talk to? Man, college students who, they just don't value the local church. And people, they will be a part of a local church, and as soon as something comes up that they don't like or they disagree,
They run.
They run.
Yeah.
They run to other people like them.
Yeah.
But we always run to people that are like us. And yet, when you look at the overarching theme and story and thread of redemption in Scripture, the very thing that Jesus did was he didn't run away.
He ran
right?
to it.
He ran to it. And so this idea, like, I'm just fascinated even by just reading this week. In the Old Testament, you couldn't approach the Lord because of his holiness, right?
Yeah.
And there had to be this purity, a ritual that had to take place so that you could come. But we get to the New Testament, Jesus brings that holiness, and he pursues the unclean. And he takes those things that are unclean, and rather than being killed when you touch it, as the priest would have been before going through that purification, when the holiness of Jesus touches that which is impure, it's made holy, right? And so the example then that God lays for us in pursuing those who are hurting, or pursuing those who are maybe less than us, or who are pursuing those who are different than us, to replicate that for us. Man, that goes beyond race, that goes beyond all conversation, but certainly it should start with race, like, in my opinion. It's the most distinguishable, like, you can't change that. That's who you are.
Yeah, very much so.
And it wasn't a mistake, and it wasn't brought about because of some sin. Like, this is who we are. And so I think we have to be mindful to pursue relationships with people who aren't like us. Not for the sake of just saying, I have a black friend, or I have a white friend, or I have a Hispanic friend, but for the sake of, like, I'm a better person when I'm around people who aren't like me, and I learn what life is like for them.
I think we are, and I think one of the ways we break that down is through mission trips. I just wanted to just really emphasize that when students are on a mission trip, and there's one thing when students are giving to people, we definitely want to do that when students are, just because that kind of breaks out their selfishness to a large degree. But when they're on the same playing field with groups that are just like them, and they're both going into a place where they're giving back together, man, something just takes place. I was talking to a guy the other day here, Chris, and his church is in Miami, middle to upper middle class Haitian church, and he goes along with one of your groups to Haiti. They've done it now for the last 8 years. And one of the things that Kenny said to me, he goes, man, both groups come from middle to upper middle class. They both go on the same trip together, and they both learn from each other in doing that. And I thought, I didn't know they did this together, first of all. I've been
Yeah.
Kenny's friend for almost 20 years. And I said, how long you guys been? We've been doing it for the last 8 years. And I thought, and that is, I think, how the body of Christ should work and look together. And that they're both going at the same time to the same place. And man, something's going on there. They've done it now for 8 years. Something has to be going on in all of this. But at the same time, they're both giving back to a group. And that does represent heaven.
Yeah,
I
that's
mean,
good.
it really does. And so I think we should constantly, as youth pastors, be saying to ourselves, okay, are we putting our kids around people who are not like them racially? Are we inviting guests in, even to speak to our students who are not like them? Are we, going to places together with the church that's down the street that may be like our church is when it comes to economics? Are we doing stuff together? When we start doing that, I think walls come down, stereotypes come down, and we just all tend to work better together anyway.
No doubt.
Yeah.
Can we change the page a little bit?
Yeah, I got
Turn the page?
Well, yeah.
Well,
I
go ahead.
guess.
What do you got?
No, I can ask him later. I just have 2 questions I want to make sure we get to before we finish. But
Well, this is somewhat trivial.
Yeah.
Trivial in the sense that it's a movie. Help me unpack a little bit this Black Panther movie phenomenon and how that's impacting our culture. Because there seems to be something to that. And I'm going to tell you, even my kids, here I live in North Georgia, North Atlanta. We went to a movie. We live in a, fairly white area, you know this, right? We went to the movie, and it was noticeable how many African Americans were in the audience with us watching. I can't remember if it was the second or third time we saw it. We've seen it so many times. I love the movie.
It's a great movie, though.
Yeah. But there seemed to be something different about it. And am I reading too much into that, or is there seems to be something that's impacting the culture a little bit there as far as that there seems to be a positive, a good pride or that comes as a result for some of the African American community. Is that true?
It is. I think it's a good movie quality wise, obviously. But I would also say,
Dude, that fight scene.
Yeah,
those fight scenes are.
It's like,
have you seen it?
No.
Jody,
Man,
I don't even know why I'm hanging out with you, man.
If
How
it's
have
not
you
a
not
cartoon,
seen
I don't
Black
get to see
Panther?
it.
It is so
it's
good.
not a cartoon, man.
That's golly.
and
I have girls,
Yes.
and they don't care about that. And any fighting movie, that's not going to happen.
That's
And then
so
my
sad.
son is like 9. Like
I would say don't take young kids to go see it.
He ain't
My
there
personal,
yet.
I had
you
everybody
know.
decide on her. Yeah, I'm just saying. Yeah.
Deal
But anyway,
with it.
okay, Jody, you just sit back for a second. We're going to talk about manly movies like Black Panther for a second.
I think because it is different, and it is a quality movie, and it is part of a great collection series, obviously. I think it's why it's kind of one of those things that's rising to the top, and it's something that people, especially Black people, can be proud of because it is
Awesome.
There's some great actors in there, I think, who represent well. But I also think we're just in a different era today. Something has changed, I would say, in the last year, 18 months, that is, I think, driving all of us to talk about topics we wouldn't normally talk about.
Yeah, it's a good thing.
And I think it's a good thing. I really do. Some of the conversations, some of the hardest conversations are ones where, man, these things are starting to rise to the top. I think one of the worst things we can do as a youth ministry, though, is go back and hide from it and act like the world is not moving all around us. Because I think a lot of our students go, okay, if we're not talking about the things that are rising all around us, then this may not be real either. And I think in students' minds, they automatically go, real world, and if we're still doing, the same old, I think students get confused and going, okay, we can talk about real stuff in the real world, but we can't talk about it here in the body of Christ.
So would it be a terrible idea as a youth pastor, as a white youth pastor, if I had a kid in my group that's African American, would me broaching the subject of, hey man, I noticed how Black Panther is really impacting the African American community in a positive way. Would that be weird to have that conversation, or awkward, you think, to have a conversation with a Black teenager in my group? Or would that be maybe a positive thing?
For most kids, they would probably look at us as weird to a certain degree.
Well, they're going to because part of it, we're weird if we ask anything whatsoever.
Yeah. Because they're in the world, and they're going, okay, this is not as a big of a deal as it is for us.
Okay.
Just to be frank with you, it's because we're the culture that we come from. But I think that's okay. I think now is a great time, even for youth groups, if they can't bring in somebody, then to get away as a group, as adult leaders, to go, hey, let's discuss race. Let's discuss even sexual harassment stuff too that's coming up now. Let's discuss some of that, because our kids are going to bring that in the room with them.
Sure.
And so if we don't know how to handle it, discuss it as leaders, man, we want to make sure we are on the same page.
Yeah.
And youth ministry, we're always on the forefront anyway. Well, I would say that when it comes to cultures, because of the people that we deal with. But what we tend to do is we tend to not do that with our leaders, though.
Yeah.
To go, hey, let's have that hard conversation, because kids are going to bring that in the room with them.
So, okay, let's say somebody listening, let's say there's a listener who is at a smaller church.
Yeah.
In maybe a rural area that is predominantly white, with a church that has no desire to pursue diversity.
Yeah, man.
Right? I mean, because what I'm afraid of is that somebody listening is going, yes, I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
And they're going to get fired.
Yeah.
And they're going to do a whole lot of damage.
Yeah.
And so how does that process... And I know we're asking, there is no easy cookie-cutter answer here.
It's a very good question.
But I'm always afraid of this when we talk about certain topics.
Yeah.
And we even talked about this with the middle school stuff in the last episode where, okay, we talked about splitting those guys, and there's a need to do
split
that.
middle school,
Man,
high
if you
school.
go and just do that, you've got to, this has to be a longer...
You don't need to get yourself fired over it. It might be something that you believe in that's worth doing, but
Yeah.
you've got to also be careful and not.
You got to be wise.
There's got to be some wisdom there. So I hear you saying, Jody, man, if I'm in an all white church and all of a sudden I want to become diverse, do I immediately just go get a van full of African American kids, bring them into my group and get myself in trouble, or do I move a little slow?
And at what point are we pursuing diversity just for the sake of being diverse?
Yeah, and I think you have to know your culture and know your church. I want me to phrase it. You have to know your church.
Right.
Some of the dumbest mistakes I've made is not knowing my church. Yes, I was there on staff and I was part of what was going on. But man, I look at the mistakes in my life, and I'm about you guys, and I go, some of the dumbest ones have been that I did not look at the lay of the land clear enough. And so I would say, know your church. I grew up in a great church in Orlando. Jim Henry was my childhood pastor. And I believe, I'm pretty sure he did, he did get fired from a church one time because of race. David Youth, who's now there now, I interviewed him recently here. And
yeah, that's an amazing interview.
Yeah.
Let's put that one in the show notes. It's off the chain good, man. It's so good.
It's one of those, David's dad did get fired.
Yeah. He talks about that in the interview a little bit.
It's one of those things that just, ingrained in his mind about what took place in his life. And his dad thought for many years that, man, I really let my family down by that. And David, has said publicly, no, and that's when I saw you in the best light, in so many words. And I think that's why he's leading a very diverse church now down there in Orlando. But I think you have to know your church, and I do think you're going to have this discussion. Some places are more so readily than others, and you have to know as a leader, hopefully, and I know that our leaders are, that you're talking to God and going, okay, God, where do you want me to bring this up in, and how should I approach it? And I think God will give you an opening to actually do it. But far too often, just my own personal life, I've jumped way ahead of God.
Yeah.
And then you have to go back and pull people in if they'll give you the grace to do that. And so know your church. I cannot say it enough. Just know your church and pray for and ask God to give you that opening.
Yeah.
So if you're in a rural area, or if you're here in Atlanta metro,
urban area,
you have to once again know it and know how to actually approach it. But I'd say even right next to prayer, ask God to give you someone who is different to help you walk through it also. And I think once you do that, you'll be able to, once you know your church, you'll be able to have that discussion. You'll be able to go back to your friend whose God has allowed you to be that, I think Matthew calls it that person of peace.
Yeah.
To go, man, how should I talk about this? What should I say? What should I not say? And I think the Holy Spirit will give you the opening and the words to say.
I think it's a process.
It is.
Like,
yeah.
you can choose that as your hill to die on, but you don't have to die on it. You know what I'm saying? Like, we say, this is it, and put my stake in.
God may be using you to be the opening.
And you can do a lot of damage if you rush ahead.
Yes.
And so this may take 4, 5, 6, 8 years. I mean, because again, if we're dealing with a situation where there's some deep bias there.
Yeah.
It's. I mean, I know. Like, I'll tell you, one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen in my life was So I lived with my grandparents for a good bit as well, and my grandparents would not say that they were racist. I don't think they viewed themselves as racist, but they had some racist views. Okay, and I don't even think they recognized them until all of a sudden I had a stepbrother and stepsister who were black.
Yeah. Wow.
And I remember my grandfather saying once, because it was all grandsons, okay? It was all been grandsons. And I remember him saying to my sister once that she's the granddaughter he never knew he needed.
Wow.
And
that's like This Is Us stuff right there, man. Like, that's right off TV. That's
I
good.
watched
Do you watch This Is Us?
I do watch that show.
Yeah, that's good.
Why? It's so sad.
It is kind of sad, but I do watch the show, though.
So
Keeps
look,
my
you're a complicated man.
Keeps
Chris
my
Trent.
tear ducts working.
Black. You got to balance out the
Black Panther. This Is Us.
It's a great show, though.
But and then what I watched take place wasn't a moment, right? But I watched the demeanor and the character of a very strong man who loved the Lord, who worked hard his whole life on a cattle farm, who would sit on the front porch, man, and pray for hours and just read and read.
Yeah.
But I watched God use that in his life to press in on areas that he had never even recognized or known to be a bias or a prejudice in his life.
Wow.
But it took a long time, right? I mean, it didn't happen overnight. And I guess that's what I'm saying. Like, even in the church context, these types of things can take a really long time. And so we talk a lot about build a culture, not a ministry.
Yeah.
Don't build a diverse ministry, build a diverse culture, because the culture will outlast the ministry.
It will. And I think we have to even look at in our own personal lives. I mean, there's some things that God is, automatically like, hey, we need to change this, and it's been changed. Then there have been some things that I wasn't even aware of until 30, 40 years down the road. And I'm thankful for God's grace that he walked me through it when I wasn't aware of it. But I would also say, though, with the culture that we're in today, what was driving a lot of this, Jody, is social media. And so we have to look at the events that are happening all around us. I think God's allowing some of those events to happen. I think not all of them to happen, obviously, to help us, get us to a point in our church culture to go, man, this is a church that God's called for us to be. I got to tell you, once again, sitting in that Wednesday night Bible study class, which I've missed, unfortunately, 2 times in a row now because of ministry stuff. Man, if you would have told me a year ago that, at Johnson's Ferry, that we would be in a class, I'd be in a class discussing race, I would have told you, I don't see that one, God.
Yeah.
But man, that class, I look at the people who are in that class, and they have shaped me and how I view race a lot. And so God is transforming me still. I'm glad that he still is through those people. And so I do think it is, once again, knowing your church, but also knowing the culture around us. It is turning. Here in Atlanta, for example, by 2020, which is just 2 years from now, we become a minority, majority, no culture. When it comes to race at all.
Yeah.
It is just one of those, all around Atlanta, you can see it happening. In rural areas, I think it will still be a little longer to actually get there. But diversity is coming in rural areas. I'd say in large cities, the top 50 metropolitan urban cities, man, it is coming within the next 2 to 5 years in most places.
Yeah, totally.
If it's not already there, really. in some places.
Before we finish,
Yeah.
are there resources that you would throw out to folks listening?
Man, there is, and there's becoming more of them. And some of them, I would say, know your church. I want to just keep saying it over and over again, so we're not getting phone calls. Getting phone calls going, thanks a lot, guys. I got fired thanks to you guys, and it's usually not thanks to us, by the way. It's usually other stuff that led to that. It's a whole nother show, obviously. But I would say the Urban Youth Workers Institute is one that I would definitely check out. Lifeway does partner with them from time to time. Mosaic Network is another one. A guy named Mark Demaz, I always get his name wrong, Demayaz is his last name, and they are on the forefront of this, big time, in fact. Those are the two, especially Mark's group, his network. It's just phenomenal what they're just doing. Another guy who's right here in Atlanta, Duluth, in fact, Mark Hearns. His name's a pastor. Mark has done, in my opinion, one of the best jobs in taking a church that was 100% white in an area that was turning all up around him racially. And he's written a brand new book out now called Technicolor, which is just a phenomenal book. Lifeway has put it out there, Robin Holman anyway. And I would recommend that book like today. But Mark took a church and just said, I have to know my church. So in knowing my church, man, how do I take the turn and that where we look like the culture around us?
Did you do an interview with him?
I did recently.
We'll get a link to that one as well.
That one too, and that was a great one. Good. Also, just really enjoyed being with Mark on that.
Is there a if I wanted to do a deep dive into understanding Black culture, African American culture?
Yeah.
Is there a book that as a white guy I probably just don't know about that I probably ought to read?
There is one.
Maybe it's a classic. Maybe it's one that I just would never pick up.
Man, I think one of the best ones is The New Jim Crow. I may be pronouncing the title there wrong, but that is one that I would pick up like tomorrow, just because it does give you a sense of, man, okay, here's where culture has come from, and here's where it is now. The author, I don't believe is a believer, but it gives you just a good sense of research.
Gotcha.
To go, okay, here's how you kind of view. It's one of the best books research-wise that's just out there.
Great.
We'll put links to all those in the show notes. I'm also going to link to the Kingdom Diversity Initiative stuff at Southeastern.
Yes, that's another great one too.
And the video that you and I talked about, Chris, Acts 29 did a video on racial reconciliation, 2016-ish. So it's about an hour long. It's a panel kind of discussion there. It's phenomenal.
Wow.
It was extremely helpful. It's worth it to watch the full hour. They have it kind of broken up into smaller segments if you'd like, but in my opinion, it's better just to watch the full hour. So I'll link to that as well.
And Walter Strickland has a new book out too. He and somebody else wrote, I believe it was Walter, about race. And if you're Southern Baptist, it's a great book to read. It's a white guy and a black guy, and they're talking about racial issues also.
Yeah, he's the man.
Yeah,
There's good ones too as well.
Good stuff. Maina, dude. Oh, you got more?
Yeah, if folks want to catch up with you,
Oh, yeah.
where's the easiest place?
Yeah,
to do
the easiest
that?
place is minaspeaks.com.
You want us to
Maina
spell that?
Speaks.
Yes, there's an actual website out there.
Which you can't. He came and spoke on a Sunday morning for me and
was fun.
just killed it. My middle school kids still talk about how much better he was than I am.
No, not much better, but
Yeah.
first of all, not much better at all, but at all.
Did you teach from James?
I
That's
did
real
not.
funny.
That's probably where
That's
I
real
should
funny.
have.
Real funny. All comes back.
It was a great experience. So I'm glad to be here with you guys, though. I mean, I got to tell you, it was fun.
Yeah, man, this is good stuff.
This morning.
Good
Thank
stuff.
you guys
Appreciate you a lot,
for
man.
doing this, man. I'm looking forward to many more of these. Not being here, but hearing many more from you guys. I can't think of a better group.
And I'd like to just go, make this official that you and I invite Jody to go see Black Panther with us. Can we do this?
Jody,
we'll
you
go
should.
see.
I mean, you just did.
I have
Let us
movie
know
pass.
when.
I have movie pass, man.
Let us know when.
Yeah,
There you
Black Panther.
Friday.
The win.
That's a Marvel movie. There are superheroes in it.
No way.
And
But Jody,
they
I
have
will say, I do get where
superpowers.
you're coming from on that, man.
Yeah.
By the way, the only reason why I went was with one of your staff guys.
There you go. Oh, I know that guy.
Yeah.
Lee Taylor.
Lee
Shout
Taylor.
out.
That's kind of why. That's why I went. My wife has not seen it, and because you have preschoolers.
Yeah.
it's
Small.
really hard to.
Yeah, man. Beautiful.
To do
Awesome.
that. But you got to
Good
go
times.
now, though, Joe. That we provide you.
Well, hey, thanks for coming on.
Thanks.
We'll make sure we put links to all that in the show notes, so you'll want to head over to thelongerhaul.com/episode 052 to grab all those. Also, if you're enjoying the podcast, even with Chris here, be sure to
Even with Chris here.
be sure to subscribe to the show so you get the episodes as they come out each week, as well as man, we'd love an honest review. Just it helps us know what's working, what's not. Super encouraging for us. But be sure to subscribe to that. You can do that at thelongerhaul.com/iTunes. And I think that'll do it for today. So we'll leave it at that. Obviously, a big discussion that we could talk forever about. But man, we appreciate you coming on. And so be sure to check out mine and all that stuff. And until next time, well, we'll see you in the next episode.
Thanks for listening to the Longer Haul Youth Ministry Podcast at www.thelongerhaul.com.